On the first day of the millennium, businessman Michiel Mol, who you might know from his work in Formula 1, through his media conglomerate, Lost Boys International, merged 3 different video game studios in the Netherlands, Orange Games, Digital Infinity, and Formula Game Development to form Lost Boys Games. It was a slow start, only making a few games for the Game Boy Color and Advance, but in 2003, Mol formed a new media company which controlled 75% of Lost Boys Games and renamed it Guerrilla Entertainment. Because of 1, tax purposes, and 2, to match with the next line of games they had planned for the future, putting focus on PCs and home consoles. For one of those games, while in the process of merging the 3 studios, they pitched a shooter called Marines to Sony Computer Entertainment headquarters in London in 1999, but they passed on it since they already had one ready for release by Bungie, called Oni. They did, however, sign them up to make another action-adventure game for the PS2 on September 2000. However, after Bungie's other shooter single-handedly turned the Xbox into a legit console rival, Sony, despite already being a juggernaut with the PlayStation 2 by that point, wanted their own flagship sci-fi FPS and got back with now-known Guerrilla Entertainment to greenlight their Marines game in 2001, although Ian Bokovan claims that Sony greenlighted the project before Halo was released. But one thing that is undisputed, however, is just how hyped the game was after it was leaked to the public. The green light was kept disclosed for a long time, initially being called Kin. And when people saw the screenshots, the trailer, opening cutscene, and E3 impressions, the scope and basic similarities to Halo, they thought it was a masterpiece in the making. Another Sony flagship franchise to lean on, another one of many reasons to buy a PlayStation 2, a Halo killer, which if that's true, even before the game came out, it seemed to blow out of proportion according to Alistair Burns. And today is usually the first thing that comes to mind when we think of the first Killzone specifically. It was released for the PlayStation 2 on November 2004 and received a PlayStation 3 remaster on October 2012. Is it me, or do the covers of both games have too many similarities? Anyway, we're looking at the PS2 version being played on the PCSX2, the first review on this channel to utilize this emulator, so we can finally see PS2 footage that doesn't look like it went through a hailstorm. Killzone is another franchise that I didn't think about growing up, partly because I still wasn't allowed to play the more mature titles at the time, and because I didn't get a PlayStation 2 until 2006. And even when the series came to the PlayStation 3, I was too occupied with the Call of Duty series. Yes, I know it gets a lot of hate now, but back then I have a lot of positive gaming memories. That, GTA and Gran Turismo were all I played in the late 2000s, early 2010s. In fact, I didn't get my first Killzone title until this year when I got Mercenary for the Vita, because it's considered one of the premier titles for the console. I've only played a little bit of it, but for a portable title, it's a really good shooter, and I'm still hoping it gets a re-release for the PS4 or 5. And after becoming the most voted suggestion on Patreon, thank you Ruffian Shark, I recently got the first Killzone for the PS2. I assume you wanted me to look at the PS3 titles more specifically, but on this channel we look at games in correct series order, and in this case, this is the bad egg of the franchise.
My people, sons and daughters of Helghast, for many years we have been a broken nation, shunned, oppressed, and conquered by those we sought to escape.
At some point in the future, Earth becomes uninhabitable after nuclear war, and all governments come together to form the United Colonial Nations, exploring to set human colonies on other planets on the Alpha Centauri system. However, the corporations have disagreements over the ownership of different planets, particularly Vector, and another war happened with the Helghast being exiled on the only planet they own. Using whatever resources they have and developing mutant-like symptoms, they become a stronger race thirsty for revenge, and they secretly attempt to retake Vector, bypassing all solar defense systems, leaving the planet and the ISA completely compromised.
These comms are getting worse. Anyone else receiving?
In the middle of it all, ISA officer Jan Templar receives orders to find Hacker, a half Helghast spy who has knowledge of how the enemy bypassed the defense network, and whilst finding other soldiers to join him on his mission, they all come together to bring the defense network back online and turn the tide against the Helghast.
I doubt an army of 4 will make it all the way up here, even if one of them is a Helghast.
As I say, let them know I'm coming down.
What I love is the way Killzone begins before you even put the disc inside. The game's cover only has these menacing looking soldiers armed and ready for battle, and looking at the manual, the front is a news article of the Helghast declaring war on humanity, with the game booting up with a motivational speech from Emperor Scholar Vazari, which looks like it was taken out of Triumph of the Will.
Defenders of the Helghast dream, now is our time!
But then, right after that speech ends,
Dead in their tracks!
that's what the rest of the game feels like, half the budget taken away without explanation. Though it tries to maintain that scope, everything becomes too much of a distraction to the point that I had to research the plot again, because I didn't even care what was going on during the playthrough.
So, the mighty brain agrees with the grunt. That's a first.
The dialogue, for example. Any attempt at character development like Rico's heavy distrust towards Hacker, the tough guy act, the naivete in charge,
And our chances, even if we pull together, are somewhere between slim and nil.
it all comes across as too cheesy. Only the villains have decent dialogue because of course they do.
Do I need a lecture on the technical specs of these platforms? No. Because I run the damn things.
Villains in not so good movies, TV shows and games, only they're the ones that stand out because you get to have the most fun. In fact, the only thing that feels high level from start to finish is the soundtrack. In every cutscene, it's as epic as any major sci-fi movie franchise, and I love listening to it during the making of this review. But at the same time, they screwed that up by simply not having any music during gameplay. At all. It's not me turning the music off for copyright's sake, there is no music. I initially thought there was a glitch where the developers had extra music prepared and just forgot to program it so that it plays in-game. But no, the PlayStation 3 version doesn't have any music either.
Trust the general to put practicalities ahead of, well, anything else.
This is one of the many reasons why the general atmosphere in-game feels so lifeless, which should be a good thing since it's war in the 24th century, it's what the developers are supposed to go for. They took inspiration from as much war history as they could find. For example, the look of cities in ruins through different eras and matched it with the timeline of this game. So while technology is advanced, with all that smoke and grey, it feels very industrial. But it's more than the art direction that makes it lifeless in a not so good way. Too many bits of the level are used more than once, the sound quality is muffled, you hear the same dialogue 100 times in one chapter, and that's not an exaggeration.
Keep out of sight.
Animations feel too basic when shooting, reloading a weapon, and when going for the melee attack it's always the same double whack of the gun. And even on the PCSX2, it looks really muddy, like the footage is recorded in both progressive scan and interlace at the same time. Whatever they try to accomplish with Killzone, to me it looks more like a PlayStation Portable title ported to the PlayStation 2.
What the hell? Incoming frag! Helghast, go!
People seem to associate the game's controls with the sniper rifle, and how unique it is for its bad aim because it appears so early in the game.
We need support! Heavy fire!
And they're not kidding. It needs to be played to be explained, but you're trying to set it while the aim is moving at the same time, and where is the middle point of the scope? Know what I mean? Thing is though, I only used it twice the entire playthrough, and I think it was only mandatory the first time you pick it up. My concern is all the weapons aiming just as badly. I wouldn't recommend this game to speedrunners because bullets never seem to go where you want them to go.
Need my glasses?
It's particularly obvious when using a gun turret. Like, I'm not even sure if headshots cause extra damage to enemies because I'm not even sure if I'm hitting them in the head. I'd also avoid using Templar's assault rifles, that's the most inaccurate of them all with the way the crossfire bounces around when firing. I get that weapons kick in real life, but it can literally take half a minute to take out one enemy from medium range. In fact, the only positive I can take out of the controls is the way you move around. It's more like a third-person shooter, you don't move freely when using the analog stick. You run forwards and sideways differently, which makes a weapon feel heavy to carry around. It must be a trademark of Killzone since it moves the same same way in Mercenary. But overall, in every way, it feels like the gameplay is limiting the amount of fun you can have. You can't jump down, you have to take ladders, take the longest way around, it's slower, and even before I started a new game, it took me a minute to work out how to type ColourShed when creating a profile. And when you eventually get the hang of it, you'll realize that's all you do pretty much the whole game. Shoot the same enemies without any change in strategy, and reach the end of the level which cuts away abruptly, sometimes with a cutscene. There's no upgrade system, no customization options, no bosses, secrets or collectibles, and though there are other objectives to complete, literally all you do is open gates and doors. Oh, and set explosive charges to anything big.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's about it. You might think that's all you do in other first-person shooters, and for some that might be true. Like for example, throughout the level you find enemy intel to collect or destroy, but otherwise it's nothing but shoot waves of enemies. But in Killzone it feels more obvious when you combine the game's repetitiveness with all the other issues.
That's messy.
I reckon that's the difference between Killzone and other first-person shooters around that time. You never get that sense of empowerment when fighting your way through these Helghasts. You play it like your life depends on it. Creeping near the corners of cover, guns don't shoot straight. You might think it's trying to be more realistic than explosive, but the developers say otherwise. I think it's just not as well made as those games. Speaking of the developers, one thing they at least tried to do to increase the replay value is have all the characters which you can select at the beginning of a chapter, slightly different stats, weapon proficiency, ammo capacity, as well as their own weapon. Some chapters are also designed for certain character strengths, at least at the beginning. Luger has less enemies encouraging you to perform quietly, vents to crawl through. Rico, there's lots of enemies and he has an LMG weapon to mow them all down. And Hacker, as an undercover Helghast, can pass through these laser-sighted parts without triggering them.
You're not gonna trust this freak to...
Hacker can scout ahead. We'll find another way around.
Well, you're in charge.
Despite their best efforts, they don't really stand out enough. Really, ammo preservation is the only thing you'll be concerned about when you realize it doesn't replenish until you complete the whole chapter. And for all the unique weapons each soldier gets, they usually run out after a couple of minutes. I was prepared to say Luger was the best soldier because it seemed like she had the only weapon that can shoot straight, but her health goes down the quickest and stealth is nearly impossible. Enemies know you're there before you even show yourself.
Quiet. Got company!
This chapter, for example, playing as Luger, I couldn't even get past the second wave, but after restarting and selecting Rico instead, aside from a few additional enemies, it was easier simply because he could take more damage. Even in action, most of the time you're the only one doing the work. Like if you're trying to clear enemies from a distance to reduce the risk of dying instantly, which I'll get to, as you can see these guys aren't doing anything. Getting up close and personal is the only way to fix it, and you'll want to because they're all invincible, so don't be concerned about Tampa's cry for help.
Help me! Help me!
Let me get clear.
Why not order soldiers to do things during missions? Get to cover on the other side, change weapons, kind of like what the Mass Effect franchise would do. Instead, by the time it gets difficult to the point where you can lose all your health on the first minute of a mission, you have to rely more on what you've got. For some, that's the sort of difficulty curve you want in a video game, but how they go about it brings the game even further down. There are some levels that can take 20 minutes to complete and have no checkpoints whatsoever. I get that health can sort of regenerate with some enemies dropping first aid kits, and it actually wasn't too bad the last couple of chapters. But what if you accidentally get in a dangerous spot, especially if enemies are usually dead on with their accuracy? I'm just saying the punishment doesn't fit the crime, especially when you encounter an enemy with a grenade launcher. No matter which soldier you're controlling, these grenades can take over half your health instantly, and you do not have a chance to react to them.
Frag out!
Incoming frag!
Luger's dead.
Okay, it's most likely because I'm reviewing this game I might be a little more impatient than I should be, but the thought of restarting from scratch because of an enemy that can instantly kill without any chance to react to it is one of the most unbearable things to encounter in any video game. Killzone is simply one of the biggest nothing games I played in a long time. There's no replay value, it doesn't control or look as good as its rivals. I mean, a Halo killer? They didn't even get a scratch on them, especially after what Bungie cooked up around the same time. It's safe to say that Halo 2 almost became the Killzone killer. Fortunately for Guerrilla Games, I say almost because along with Shell Shock Narm 67, it was the first-person shooter they ever made, therefore the first in the series that left a lot on the table for more, which they got, as despite the mixed reception where they took a little flack for all that hype, it sold well enough that publishers of both these games wanted Guerrilla Games as a subsidiary, with Sony winning their signature in 2005. Looking at what they've accomplished since that takeover, it's safe to assume they've come a very long way, and hopefully I'll find enough time to review the rest of their games, the rest of the Killzone series and Horizon Zero Dawn. Just an incredible streak. And that's why I'm not completely frustrated with the first Killzone. It's their first attempt at the genre, and Guerrilla Games have learned from it since. But with that said, I'd avoid this one and pretend Killzone 2 was the first in the franchise. Let me know if I should review that one too.